Our first question goes to Lynn Holland, who unfortunately could not be here with us today, but kindly sent in a video response to one of our questions. That question is as follows. One lesson that came out of the Me Too movement with respect to addressing and responding to sexual harassment is the importance of having multiple channels for employees to report misconduct. In the past year, we've seen an emerging public outcry by employees over the mishandling of cases of sexual harassment and misconduct after they're reported. They say that their companies continue to conceal rather than confront these reports. What is your advice for employers on how to create a speak up culture that encourages reporting and to ensure that employees know that their reports will be taken seriously?
Thank you, Haley, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm disappointed not to be able to attend today's panel live and to continue and join the rest of the workshop. But this organization's mission is so important to me. I'm grateful to the Purple Campaign for the opportunity to record a short message and answer this important question. As we all know, the world of work has changed. Some companies are finally returning to the office, others have adopted fully remote workplaces, and many have a hybrid format like Zoom. What hasn't changed, regardless of whether you are in person, remote, or hybrid, is that you must work tirelessly to ensure a safe and inclusive workplace that is free of harassment and allows individuals to be heard and valued. That's where we all do our best work. Companies with strong speak-up cultures are stronger for it. Not only does it mitigate risk by encouraging team members to raise issues and concerns as soon as they see them, but the ability to provide and listen to multiple viewpoints develops the muscles that groups need to make better decisions. So how do you create a speak-up culture? At Zoom, our approach has been first to design and promote a workplace with multiple avenues for employees to voice and raise issues and concerns, including any form of harassment. And second, speaking up needs to be driven and supported both by the top and multiple teams. Regarding multiple channels, of course, the more ways you have, the more likely employees will be to take advantage of them. We have implemented a number of channels in addition to the whistleblower hotline for facilitating internal discussion. We have, for example, employee resource groups, regular town halls on a myriad of issues, including DEI-centered discussions, and meetings, company chat, and so forth. We believe that having multiple avenues like this is key to a speak-up culture in a hybrid environment. We often use company-wide meetings, of course, using our own platform, Zoom, which include discussions on social issues. We also use our company chat to discuss these types of issues as well as policies. Frequent and transparent communication is a key pillar to a supportive and inclusive company. As a Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer, naturally I'm a believer in compliance playing a crucial role in fostering this type of environment. The framework for this culture can be put in place by compliance teams like mine. But in order to be effective, it must have buy-in and be embraced and promoted from the top, and of course driven by many teams. Sometimes, of course, this is referred to as a big funnel approach, whereby lots of different teams can receive reports, but then confer and share those with compliance so that we can filter them and do an intake and make sure that things are addressed. With respect to tone at the top, our CEO, Eric, has a leadership style that is motivated by his desire to be a model for doing the right thing. He puts a lot of thought into how we can maintain a continuous dialogue that allows us to address important, sensitive issues in a respectful, thoughtful, and authentic manner that is inclusive of everyone's beliefs, and to be transparent about steps we are taking to address issues. Employees have an incredible ability to sense when a company or its leaders are not being genuine or transparent. Fostering this culture of trust and transparency hopefully allows employees to feel comfortable to raise issues and concerns as soon as they see them, rather than conceal them. And from there, compliance can investigate, along with other key stakeholders such as HR, legal, internal audit, for example, and then include the business and business leaders in remediation and continuous improvement to protect your people and drive results. I'll mention another key component. When a report is substantiated, think carefully about how to remediate and share with employees that the company is taking corrective action in order to first do the right thing, of course, and second, to help build trust. The confidentiality of internal investigations must be maintained, but in order to successfully cultivate a speak-up culture, Think about ways that work for the culture of your company to communicate to employees actions the company has taken to address such concerns and to make necessary improvements to make sure that they don't happen again. For example, is this an awareness campaign? Is this a website with real-life speak-ups and results shared with the company? Of course, without the confidential details. Is it maybe a brown bag lunch and learn type series where people discuss lessons learned from incidents or policies or certain cases? Again, without the confidential details. So while we have entered a new era of work, fostering a culture that encourages transparent, honest, and respectful feedback will be more important than ever, and generally appreciated both inside and outside the company, whether you are in person, remote, or hybrid. In closing, I'd like to thank the Purple Campaign for allowing me to share my perspective and for all that they do to help move the conversation forward. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Lynn. Our next question goes to Brittany. Brittany, you have quite a bit of experience working in the anti-gender-based violence field, experiences which include conducting extensive research on how businesses and practitioners can best address sexual violence and misconduct within their spheres of influence. Now that the world of work has changed, we're seeing even more gray areas of misconduct, where it's not always clear what constitutes sexual harassment. What is Bumble doing to meet the current moment and address the wide range of approaches employers should be taking when determining how to investigate incidents and take appropriate action in response?
2 years in, and I'm still talking when we're muted. Anyway, thanks, Haley. First of all, I wanted to just acknowledge, obviously, that I'll be talking about Bumble's approach as it relates to our dating and friendship connection platforms. So although it's outside of the traditional employer context that Purple Campaign focuses on mostly, we think that there's still a lot of lessons learned from both sectors. So I'll be talking a little bit about how we approach corrective action and investigation and policy development on a platform that is mostly digital, but also bringing together people in real life. So first things first is the member safety team at Bumble is quite in its infancy. That doesn't mean Bumble hasn't addressed safety before. They very much have, but in this last year, we have made a dedicated team finally to fully devote more resourcing and more intentional thought and specialty to our safety initiatives, both public and internal. So there's a lot of work to do, which is why I was so excited to come here in July from Uber and take some of the lessons that I've learned from a more mature public company that might have already policies in place to a freshly new public company that we're kind of still building some of these policies and procedures as we fly the plane. And I'm sure that employers can really probably relate to that as they still are figuring out kind of the best practices to employ in their environments. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is we currently actually just rolled out a new sexual harassment policy. And again, this governs member behavior. So on the platform, we're not talking about Bumble employees necessarily. And the first thing we wanted to make sure that we addressed was the range of behavior that we know can happen under this sexual misconduct or sexual harassment umbrella. In our case, it's everything from an inappropriate emoji, possibly, to non-consensual intimate image sharing, or what's commonly referred to as revenge porn. So those range of behaviors are quite drastic in severity. We knew that we wanted to make sure that our corrective actions were also be matching the level of severity, and how we think about it. And again, this is all very new since we're still a new team, but how we think about it is approaching things from two different buckets of harm. There is individual harm, which of course includes individuals that are harmed by sexual harassment, sexual assault in in-person accounts, and gender-based violence generally. But then on a digital platform, we're also tackling things that we call community integrity harm. That is, not necessarily having a big, strong, harmful impact on an individual, but certainly can over time degrade the integrity of the platform or the trust in your community and the reputation of your brand. So these things can include things like commercial activity, someone trying to use the dating platform to, sell their herbal tea or what have you, just like things that the platform was not intended for. And so we know that those community integrity harm actions should understandably have a less punitive approach than, say, someone distributing revenge porn. So that's what I wanted to touch on. And I know that Aisha is going to get into the really fun nitty-gritty about corrective action and how it should be mapped to the level of harm. But we do also, we hear from victims and survivors all the time that they're not always looking or expecting the perpetrator or the offender, or the accused party, to lose their job, or in Bubble's case, perhaps even lose access to the platform. They just want the behavior to stop and not occur to another person. So sometimes for Bumble and other dating and social media platforms comes in the form of preventative education and warnings. And so what we are now shifting to is not necessarily having a strong deplatforming policy for those lower level incidents. In fact, we want to shift to more of a communication with our members to explain why certain behaviors may have been misconstrued, why they go against our guidelines, Bumble's overall approach to respectful and healthy relationships, and how they can better leverage the platform to create those healthy relationships for themselves. And so we are currently working on kind of revamping those communications to our members when they receive a warning of an initial report of unwanted behavior or unwanted sexual comments in the case of sexual harassment. And so the final thing before I hand it over back to Haley is that on a social media or dating platform, in the case of Bumble, we have the luxury, I suppose you could say, of not only being reactive to member reports when they report an incident has happened on or off platform, but we also have the ability to be proactive in how we scan or develop proactive tools to pick up on problematic behaviors and content before they actually are able to be reported by someone harmed by that content. And so those tools can look like natural language processing and machine learning and very fancy algorithms that I am definitely not qualified to talk about. But I think that it's always really interesting when we take that proactive lens and try to apply it to an employer context. What does that look like, right? That might look like, training during an onboarding presentation. It might be bystander intervention training, which we talked about earlier, right? It might be just setting up these proactive channels to catch and be a safety net for incidents or circumstances that sometimes the victim might not always feel comfortable coming forward. That could be, manager training, as Ali talked about before. So proactive tools is something that we really lean on, and I'm finding a lot of great, interesting food for thought as I think about it on other environments, such as the employer context. So I think that might be it. I'm probably forgetting a lot of what I intended to say, but I will defer to Aisha and Haley, because I know they have lots of great ideas on corrective action, and I'll be here for further questions as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brittany. I look forward to learning more during the share back. So now onto our third and final question for Aisha. Aisha, around the globe, we have heard stories from survivors about how critical accountability and belief are to healing. In your view, why is accountability so important when it comes to validating an individual who has experienced harm? And how can institutions better acknowledge and address the backlash people often face for speaking up about incidents of misconduct?
Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I had to pause. I'm an East Coaster, but presently on the West Coast. So I'm like, what time is it? So greetings. Let's just do it greetings. I just want to join the chorus of just thanking the Purple Campaign for all of their important work. It is such a gift to be a member of the advisory board and also to be friends with Allie. So just really happy to be able to participate and weigh in on this really important topic that is deeply personal as well as professional for me. So I always start with the fact that I am a survivor. So my work is informed by my lived experiences around being a survivor. And I, several years ago, created the terms in the 3 words. I didn't create the words, obviously, but love with accountability. It's a little different in terms of in the workplace. That comes out of the context of doing work in families around abuse, as well as in like community organizations and stuff where there is kind of an ethic of love in terms of being involved with social change. So for me, I think one of the really big components is how do we respond and versus react to incidences of harm, of sexual violence, of harassment. How do we do that in the workplace? And echoing what Brittany was talking about, that a lot of people, there are some people who do want folks fired or out of the place, but a lot of people really are looking for accountability. And so often, for a whole host of reasons, accountability can, will not be used for protecting companies, protecting brands. And I think that in some ways that accountability can be a very powerful, a powerful medium, and in fact, enhancing the brand and saying that we are concerned about harm. We are going to address harm. And what does it look like if it's not necessarily punitive, and how do we look at accountability in a way in which accountability doesn't equate condoning harm, but it also doesn't equate like just kind of punitive measures, because and that doesn't mean sanctioning, censoring, creating boundaries and all of that. I want to be clear, but I feel like so much of silence around harm is connected to not wanting possibly to be a whistleblower in retribution from the company for breaking the silence, and then also for concern about the person who's caused harm. It's like they want the harm to stop, they want it to stop, but they're not necessarily wanting to see somebody without a job or without a job. And so for me, what I've been interested in, and again, similar or parallel to Brittany, my work doesn't focus in the workplace, but I think that there are many parallels because I do a lot of work in terms of sexual violence and sexual harassment on campuses. And so not a direct parallel, but there is a situation where you have 2 people who are a member of an institution, members of an institution, either as employees or as students. And what do we do with that? Like, how do we make it safe for the person who's been harmed? How do we hold the person who's caused harm accountable? How do we hold them accountable in a way that hopefully encourages them to change their behavior? Again, not letting anyone off the hook, but I think that so many people don't even know what they're doing is harm. I mean, I do think sexual violence, definitely you are harming someone. I'm not. But I think that there is really kind of a lack of an in-depth understanding, or such a broad spectrum of an understanding around what harm is. So what is maybe okay in certain cultural environments is not okay in others. So how can we be proactive in terms of creating situations where there are talks, there are workshops, there are trainings, if you will, that everyone is involved in, right? So that it's not just only singling out the folks who have been immediately impacted, but everyone, because if not, then we're going to constantly be in a reactive situation as opposed to responding. So one of the things, and I mean, I think about it in terms of, again, using a campus model, is like how often there are trainings and awareness, particularly for incoming first-year students, around what constitutes sexual misconduct, what constitutes bystanders roles, what does a healthy bystander intervention look like. All of these are opportunities, and again, we know that doesn't stop the violence, but at least folks are coming in with an understanding. And I think that in workplaces, because we are adults, there's an assumption that we all understand. We have a kind of a foundational understanding of various forms of harm. And I don't think that that's the case. And I think that what's really important is that we create situations where there's conversations around it. And yes, it costs money in the form of time, right? It costs money perhaps in the form of bringing in experts to do the work. But I think it saves money, because in the long run, hopefully you have decreased the possibility of, let's say, more incidences than you would have had. So for me, I think, the ultimate goal is not having any forms of harm in our workplaces or any of our spaces. And I think that we have to be willing to be kind of what I coined or learned from the writer Audre Lorde, like deliberate and intentional with that work. And so rather than kind of like racing to the finish line to be like, oh, we've done it, like, let's think about what are the steps, what is the movement that we have to take in order to create spaces where survivors are safe, that people are empowered to come forward, that there are safe spaces, or brave spaces, which I really like that term much more than safe spaces, but brave spaces where people can come forward to talk about the harm, as well as brave spaces where we can hold those folks accountable who've caused harm, and not kind of, because the incidences of harm it's so pervasive in all societies, but in this society, and this kind of notion or belief that we're going to avoid it by not talking about it, by not talking about it is not realistic. What's really important is that we talk about it, that we acknowledge that it happens, it's happening perhaps when we don't even know it, and that we being the organizations, companies, are committed to addressing it. And we're committed to addressing it in a holistic way that, again, ensures the safety and sanctity of the victims or survivors, depending on how they identify themselves, and calls on the accountability of the folks who've done harm. And definitely, to the extent that it's, I set my timer because I can just go on and on, to the extent that it's possible to when I say punitive, to the extent where, and sometimes it might be necessary, though that is never my default, but in terms of bringing in officials and stuff, the law, but what are ways in which folks, in terms of bystanders who can intervene, what are ways in which the people who caused harm, that there are opportunities for them to learn? Because I think for me, the goal is really to change people's behavior, right? Not at the expense of the survivors or the victims. That's not their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the community, of the institutions, to like, what is the work that we can do? Because like, kind of just like getting rid of this person, who's to say that the next person isn't going to have maybe maybe parallel situations of lack of understanding causing harm. So again, for me, it's really about how do we pull up those roots beyond just kind of trimming the tree, trimming the leaves. Like, we really want to get to the roots. And by getting to the roots, that means that we really have to be intentional with trainings, intentional with declaring that this is brave space for survivors, declaring that this is accountable space for people who have caused harm. So these are some of the things that I think about in terms of how do we address this in the workplace, and how do we do it in a way that encourages disclosure rather than encouraging silence.
Thank you so much, Aisha, and thank you to all our fantastic panelists. We really appreciate your taking the time to engage with these questions.